Hello everyone, Alice Gold here. Another week in the life of Tottenham Hotspur, eh? It just nothing's normal. Nothing's normal about that club, which obviously as a reporter is great in terms of there's always something different to write about. But my goodness, they don't do stuff in just a normal way. I'm not going to spend too long on the cup final. I'm going to have a brief discussion about it, just various points, but I'm not going to dwell too long on it because ultimately it's done. I think everyone's just going to have to move on from it, and it wasn't the greatest match in the world. One positive I'd really like to start with, though, is the return of football fans. Tottenham fans were there at Wembley, sunny afternoon, especially the first half, and they were singing their voices out. About 2,000 season ticket holders, and then I'd imagine some of the, I think it was 4,000 people from Brent and NHS staff were also given tickets. I'd imagine some of those would be Spurs fans as well. And they were so noisy. It was brilliant. I was lucky enough to not be too far. The press desks on my side were pretty close to Spurs fans, and I did a little video up on Twitter because Wembley used to be a bit of a cavern when you didn't have many fans in it. A bit of an empty cavern and kind of an echoey noise, whereas I felt whether they've just sorted acoustics out or whatever, I don't know if you can do that in a stadium that's not brand new, but the sound was brilliant. The Spurs fans really were in full voice, and despite the result, they just came out there looking to be a part of football again. But as for the match itself, I mean, I made the comparison on Twitter. I did a GIF from Godfather 3, reporting on Tottenham Hotspur, supporting Tottenham as we all do, or certainly I did as a young boy. No choice. I had no choice. In that way, with supporting Tottenham Hotspur, you are properly born into it. Although, to be fair, there are people that join in later because of a real passion for the club, but certainly some of us are born into it. And I think it summed up for me. The GIF I used, I felt really encapsulated my whole feelings is you can go into a match like that thinking, oh God, they're going to get embarrassed. It's going to be like 5-0 to City. And just for some reason, on the morning of the game, you just get that little bit of hope. You just build up that little shred of maybe, that possibility. And the GIF that I used, because I just felt it perfectly encapsulated, it was Godfather 3, Michael Corleone. When he's like, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. That was a terrible impression. I was going to go proper Al Pacino, and I pulled back from it, and it ended up that awful compromise impersonation. Always reminds me of Silvio doing it in Sopranos. But that's, more like Captain Birdseye, I think, that I did there. But that, just when you think you're away from it, they just somehow suck you back into believing again. And I think that's probably the same of a lot of football clubs. And on the day, I saw a lot of stuff chucked at Ryan Mason after the game, out of his depth, things like that. I thought there was certainly, in hindsight, mistakes in the starting 11 and the substitutions made. But what I would say in Ryan Mason's defence, he was 6 days into his management career and his team kept Manchester City out for 82 minutes of a 90-minute match. And they only lost 1-0. It wasn't the greatest match. It wasn't the greatest performance. It wasn't full of the exciting football and Tottenham Hotspur play that he promised. No, it wasn't. But ultimately, a guy 6 days into his managerial career, holding one of the best managers in the world in Pep Guardiola, if not the best, holding his team at bay for that long, not obviously himself, but his tactics and the way he set the team up. I don't really think as a manager, he should absolutely be slated for that. I kind of felt as well that he went in quite pragmatically, having wanted the adventurous play that we saw against Southampton second half, and I believe we're going to see again in the coming matches. I felt he was quite pragmatic and almost followed probably the Jose Mourinho blueprint that we would have seen for the game, very much sitting back and hoping to hit on the counter. And what I would say again, I was saying this towards the end of the Mourinho time as well, and the same as Poch time, some of the players just didn't turn up in the big games, and they're the big players. I see a lot of stuff with players linked here, there and everywhere because they should leave Tottenham to win trophies. But my argument back to that in a sense is, but why can't they win the trophies at Spurs? It's not like they haven't had chances. The amount of, 4 finals now Tottenham have been in? Is it in recent years? I'm trying to think now. Champions League final, Carabao Cup in Poch's first year, obviously one just gone. Oh, and there's one pre-Poch as well, wasn't there? There was another Carabao Cup as well. Was it 2009, I think? Obviously, that's 2009. You can't really lay on these players. But certainly the 3 since, and plenty of semi-finals. they kind of have stuttered when it's mattered the most. And I felt Kane wasn't great. I mean, yes, you could argue he was coming back from an injury, and there were certainly points when he stayed down too long. But we're not talking about the Champions League final here, where he was out for 2 months. We're talking about him out for about 7-8 days. And I didn't feel that, other than some really nice touches when he got the ball, I didn't feel, and this is always something I say, it's maybe a bit lazy, I don't know, but I always feel like world-class players should take games by the scruff of the neck themselves. And I do think, to be fair to Kane, he's been doing that a lot of the season. Essentially, Spurs, he's been carrying them on his back most of the season. But I just felt in the final, it was very much like he was waiting for things to happen for him rather than trying to make them happen. And Sonny as well. Sonny was crying his eyes out at the final whistle. And I do wonder whether there's a part of him that maybe feels, maybe that's because of his performance. Sonny's had a funny 2021. He's started, the first half of the season was incredible. But then you look at his stats since the turn of the year, and I think it's 4 Premier League goals in 17 matches, and I think 5 assists, which for most normal players, that's not bad. For Sonny, I think, especially with the amazing pace he set in the first half of the season, I think he'd be disappointed with that. And he hasn't really been making an impact on matches. And certainly in the final, there were so many times where he was up against Kyle Walker, who we know he can be very good, but also can have iffy moments defensively. And it really was crying out for Son to just run at him. And he didn't. There were too many times turned inside and played a safe ball. And it looks to be a confidence thing, which is understandable. I think a lot of players in the second half of the season probably been knocked confidence-wise. But yeah, I just kind of feel Son has the potential to be utterly world-class. And it's just maybe occasions like that are just stopping him breaking into that next category. Because he's got all the ability in the world, and yes, people could argue the service wasn't there, and I'll come to that in 1 second with my starting lineup thing. But again, players like Son and Kane, and including Kane in this as well, have got the ability to make things happen out of nothing themselves. Whether there's service either way, I felt Lucas Moura did okay. Had some lovely turns on the halfway line and running. He looked like the one who was going to cause the most threat. What I would say is people kind of criticise me with my player ratings. How could you not give him really high marks? And my logic for the rating was that, while yes, he was definitely a threat, and obviously Laporte had a couple of real issues with him, potentially both yellow card challenges. Although, as Ryan Mason correctly said, if he got the yellow for the first one, he probably wouldn't have made the tackle for the second one. But then the flip side is, would that meant Lucas have had a free run? There's loads of permutations when you do that. But ultimately, with Lucas, I felt that a lot of his damage was done in those deeper lying positions, whereas he didn't really do enough when it came to the final third, and that's why I didn't give him a higher mark. But yeah, when the front three just wasn't firing at all, and I just feel, yes, the manager, I think Ryan Mason, I was surprised personally with Tanguy Ndombele not being in the starting lineup. I understand the decision was made based on form. He wasn't carrying a knock or an injury or anything. It just, they felt he hasn't been particularly great in the last couple of matches and that others deserved a chance. I personally would say the way they were trying to play was very deliberate, with Dyer and Alderweireld either side of Lloris trying to get the ball, building up possession from the back. That's great and it's lovely. And I think that's probably, what Spurs haven't been doing enough of this season. Mourinho very much not a big believer in possession-based football, but I felt that if you're going to play that kind of football, you need someone like Tanguy Ndombele, who then in the next step can turn away from players, can beat people, can break the lines and keep the ball. Whereas I felt Lo Celso had a poor first half. Second half woke up a bit and then got taken off. And sorry, a bit snotty today. And I just felt Ndombele was kind of that missing player they needed in that formation. So that I wasn't massively impressed with in terms of the management side of things. And then likewise, substitutions. I mean, like I say, Lo Celso seemed to be actually getting into the game. And if you are going to take him off, then probably Ndombele for me is the scenario, is the person you bring into that. And then again, I felt it was more a reputation sub. I felt Lucas, like I said, was at least threatening to do stuff, whereas maybe Son wasn't at all. And there was almost I don't know, I kind of felt like maybe Mason, I don't want to say he was scared because that would be unfair, but I kind of think maybe he just went on reputation and the belief that Son is someone that can still do something whether he's not confident or not. Because I thought that was really harsh on Lucas to come off and have Son remain on when I felt Lucas had been the better player on the day. And obviously, you're bringing on Sissoko instead of Ndombele. And Sissoko, in the year that Tottenham went straight to the Champions League final and had that season, Sissoko was brilliant. He really was a driving force behind that team with his work in the transitions. Everything that's kind of happened since, for some reason, especially, I feel really a lot this season, and I've said this before, so apologies for repetition, but you see him kind of advancing with the ball and then not knowing what to do with it. And that may be bad running and movement around him. It may be that, but there's so many times when he just takes a beat, just takes a breath and stops, and the movement and the momentum of a move are completely kind of destroyed. And it just happened too much. He doesn't seem to know what to do with the ball. So that was why, for me, Tongi Ndombele in that role, yes, he might not be as good defensively, but at that point, I kind of feel you want to push on and try and win that game. And I think Ndombele would have been able to hold the ball and use it far better. So yeah, that was that. I mean, some positives. I want to point out 3 players in particular. I thought Hugo Lloris, I thought goal was superb. Not much he could do about the goal, but I thought in terms of he made some big saves, and I could hear it, even with the crowd noises, you could hear him being really dominant in his area, and I thought he was superb. Actually, I should point out Sissoko as well for the goals. All Sissoko, pretty much marking zonally, and just once again, we've seen him do this before, not jumping to combat to leap up for a header. But elsewhere, I thought Toby Alderweireld probably maybe his best game of the season. I thought he was very much Toby Alderweireld of old, which is brilliant because myself and others included, have said that, is he a declining force as a defender? Is he still a very good defender, but not the top one? I felt that was that's probably, maybe even go as far to say, one of his best performances in the last 2 or 3 seasons. He was superb. Even, players like Sterling and all that weren't getting by. There was a couple of occasions when a bit with their pace, but ultimately he was winning everything. He was superb. And I want to also mention, even though I got flack on Twitter for saying it, I thought Eric Dyer played really well. Yes, I completely agree. His distribution is not great. It has always been a mixed bag, and yes, he sometimes creates problems for himself. However, in terms of pure defending, what you want a defender to do, I thought he was excellent. I thought he was so good. There were so many last-gasp blocks, putting his body on the line. For Eric Dyer, that match meant everything. I mean, I watched him after the final whistle. He was doing a Spurs TV interview, and I watched him, and, he was very emotional. He got to the end of the interview, and he had to turn away, put his kind of, his tracksuit kind of neckline up above his face because he was getting very upset. And I think that kind of summed up how much he kind of cared about the match and also was fighting for Tottenham. And I think you saw that in his performance. Eric Dyer will always get pelters. He always will, because he makes silly mistakes sometimes, as do most of the Spurs defence. And people have just decided that he's not good enough. Whether that's the case or not, I hope I always do, like to take things on a game-by-game basis. And I felt, distribution aside, some sticky moments, I thought his defending was terrific. It really was. And I will no doubt get comments underneath saying, yeah, what are you talking about, you muppet? Eric Dyer's rubbish and all this. And that's fair. You can absolutely have your opinion, but I think it's also important to take isolated performances and look at them as well. And I thought he was superb. I thought it was really, really good. So those 3 players for me, probably the only ones that came out with much credit. I thought none of the subs really particularly worked or came on and did that much. Obviously, all came on quite late, really. So yeah, it was a real damp squib of a cup final. And again, another one for the list of Spurs not reaching that kind of top level that they need to reach in these big matches. So, let's move on from the final. Like I said, I didn't want to spend too much, so 14 minutes, that's more than enough. Let's move on. Very quickly, I want to mention about Harry Kane quotes I've seen come out today. You can take it in 2 ways. You can take it in, again, it's him saying, I want to win the biggest prizes. I am not doing that at Tottenham. You can take it that way. I thought there was another line in the middle a bit that obviously people aren't going on too much. But he did also say, this is something we need to look at our performances and we need to look at this over the summer and come back and improve. So you could look at it like that. He's talking about himself and coming back for next season being better for it. Whether that's at Tottenham or not. Again, I'm not going to go down that road because you know my thoughts on it. I can't see anyone that can afford to buy Harry Kane or will pay the money it would take to get Harry Kane this summer. I can't see it. I could be wrong, and he could have had the most incredible Euros, and someone just goes, look, we've got to do this ridiculous deal, 175, 200 million, whatever it is, we have to do it. My gut tells me I can't see how that happens, especially, turning 28 in the summer as well. He's not an old man or anything, but for that kind of money, I wonder whether you take less of a risk or a gamble on a younger player. That's just my opinion. Let's talk about the new manager. As you might have seen, I popped on Twitter, put it out on Twitter. I'm told Tottenham are hoping to make an announcement before the end of this season. Which, I was surprised at that, I must admit. It's good. It's good in my mind. It's good because it gives the new person, whoever they may be, a proper summer to prepare and plan and make sure the transfer targets and players brought in are to do with very much what they want. So that's excellent. It does throw some interesting kind of thinking out in terms of then who it can be, which we'll come to in a second. But whoever it is, it's just such a huge decision to get right for Daniel Levy, pretty much. We know. I've said this before and I don't need to repeat it too much, but I've always held this belief with Daniel Levy and the club's managerial decisions that the ones of work that have been fortunate, backup, second choices, whatever you want to call them. I always say the main three are Martin Jol, came in as assistant manager, took over because Jack Santini didn't work. Harry Redknapp would not have been a first choice manager, but they turned to a safe pair of hands because the main big choice they'd had was Juan de Ramos, and it all fell apart after less than a year, or exactly a year, something like that. And Mauricio Pochettino, they wanted Louis van Gaal, couldn't get him, and Poch came in and did what he did. So 3 out of, what are we looking at? I think someone told me earlier it's something like 23 managers if you include caretakers within the 20 years that Erik and Daniel Levy have been in charge. It's crap. It's crap. There's no getting around it. That's a very poor record in terms of management decisions. So with everything that's going on right now, with protests, I spoke to some of the young lads protesting ahead of the Southampton game. Some really good people in there, and I understood their frustrations, what they were getting at. It was a very young, I think I put this in one of my reports, a very young crowd on the whole. There was a few older people and a few women dotted in there, but for me the kind of main demographic was very much kind of late teens to mid-20s men, which I thought was interesting. It means absolutely nothing, but I just thought that was quite an interesting demographic. It wasn't many, it was about 80, possibly 100 at its peak, but this is the first time we're actually seeing kind of real, a kind of, how do I put it, an actual physical representation of this massive disconnect between the fans and the club right now. And obviously the Trust have then had their vote, voting for the executive board, which I believe is Daniel Levy, Donna Marie Cullen and Matthew Collicott, to resign and then form a new board with fan involvement as well. They voted that. I think the Trust has got something like 22,000 or more members. I think the vote was done over Zoom with about 600, 700 people taking part. They decided they wanted to make that statement. They wanted to put that to the club, and what will come of that, we'll see. But certainly in terms of the disconnect, it's huge between, I think we went from the real height under Poch of, I think I've probably said it in videos or I wrote it, I don't think there'd ever been a closer time between the fans and the club. And I think we're now going completely the other way, where it's probably has never been as fragmented, that relationship, or fractured. And I think there's another protest coming. It's meant to be for the final home game, which is Aston Villa. I've seen people saying it's going to be the Saturday, but obviously I'm not sure whether they've taken into account that Villa match is going to move to be after the cut-off, so they can have fans inside the ground. So I don't know whether they'll still stick to that Saturday, or, personally, you'd think it would make more sense to do it when there's an actual match on and when there's cameras, when the journalists and media, everyone's there as well. But, who am I? It's not my kind of... it's nothing that obviously I'm involved in, but I'd like to obviously report on it as I did the previous one. But yeah, it's a huge... This management decision has to be the right one. Daniel Levy, of course, was very involved in the appointment of Mourinho. That was very much a Daniel Levy-driven decision. This one maybe needs to be a more more people in the club having an input, and actually, because I've put this as well. I know the ideal profile they want for their new manager is a progressive manager who's very attack minded, plays possession based football, fits into the culture of Tottenham. This kind of attacking, swashbuckling style that I like to play with, and also, using the cutting edge techniques that Tottenham have used. Under Potts, they were very scientifically state of the art what they used. It sounds like a lot of the Mourinho methods are maybe more not quite at that kind of using a lot of that. Maybe more. I don't know how to put it really. I think Mourinho's maybe has always used similar methods, and I think the club want to get back to maybe using more scientific analysis of performances and fitness and things. Because I put this out. I know some of the Mourinho fans weren't delighted with it, but I've heard from a few people. It's not just one. I've heard from a few people within the club that fitness levels, the squad's not in a great place, and we're not talking about because of a build-up of matches. We're talking about their kind of base level of fitness isn't great. And that's what they're kind of finding. And this was said at United, it was something Solskjaer came out publicly, I think, and said as well. So, it's not me just having a dig. The Mourinho fans, I've had to do a lot of muting this week. They've been very, very, very upset, which is understandable when your manager has been sacked from, another job. And perhaps, certainly wasn't all his fault at all. But yeah, that's what I've been told by a couple of people. And so it needs to be someone, especially if they're going to play that high-intensity football that Spurs kind of look best when they're playing, you're going to have a high level of fitness. So that's clearly something that maybe that's the case of getting the new manager in so they can hit bang, like first day of pre-season, get them really worked on, albeit we're going to have the Euros. But yeah, talking about that, the like I said, that they want to hopefully announce before the end of the season, that makes it very interesting who they can announce and who would be in a position to be announced at such a stage. Like I said before, rather than a short list, I think there's been a fair old long list. They've properly looked around and really wanted, like I say, get this decision right. I think they've been sounding out a fair few intermediaries. I think what I would say is we see a lot of blah, blah, manager X rejected Tottenham, blah, blah, blah. Knowing how the business works, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a bit of self-promotion. Sometimes it's making an appointment by someone else look better. It happens with players as well. Player X rejected, let's say Tottenham, to join blah, blah. Often, it's never really got to that stage. Sometimes it might be a pure sounding out an intermediary like, are they available in the summer? Would they be available for a new adventure? And they might be, no, they're not in that position right now. And it's not really rejecting. It could be, and sometimes I know that it hasn't even got to that stage with anyone or a certain person and it said they've rejected or whatever. But what I would say is they certainly would have put the feelers out. We know they were very, there's a lot of admirers of Julian Nagelsmann. He's now gone off the table. That's him done. I still feel that was maybe a missed opportunity in the past. Obviously, with hindsight, the Mourinho era didn't work, and I know Spurs were very interested in Nagelsmann then. He's gone to Bayern Munich. I think it's something like a record €20 million compensation fee. So, let's be honest, that would have put Spurs off in the first place anyway. Brendan Rodgers is another had one that I admire. Would I ever say that he was one that they seriously probably thought they could get? Personally, and I think I've said this a number of times in the past, is right now the time to get Brendan Rodgers out of Leicester, when they're likely to be in the Champions League. It's tough to see, we all have this affinity with Tottenham Hotspur, but it's tough to see jumping out of Leicester, who obviously won the Premier League title only a couple of years ago, and in the Champions League likely next season, to go to Tottenham. It kind of feels like a downward step. So that one, I kind of never felt that was one that probably Spurs seriously would have gone down that road, despite the fact that they like him as a manager. But obviously he's now come out publicly and said, look, I'm not interested in leaving for Tottenham or anything, which, yeah, like I said, kind of makes sense. And then, where else does that leave you? Obviously, Erik Ten Hag, the Ajax boss, very, very heavily linked, and I know Spurs do like him. He's obviously just won the Eredivisie. He fits in with the idea of announcing before the end of the season, because I believe the Eredivisie season will finish does finish before the Premier League, so it kind of fits that time frame if you want to look at that. I don't know whether it's as advanced as that stage of having proper discussions with Ten Hag himself or anything. I'd imagine he's still wrapped up in the finishing the Eredivisie season still. But for me, and a lot of people ask, who would you like to see? I'd say he's one of the names for me that I like the idea of. I think he's a very progressive manager. He did really good things with Ajax. We know he can develop a young player. And, the drawback with him, and I've been told this, is there's a fear that he's ingrained in the Ajax culture. And how do you translate that when you're out of that very strict structure that you have at Ajax that essentially it can negate how important the manager is. Sometimes it kind of almost is a machine where you just kind of step inside it. But I think that would probably be unfair with Ten Hag. He's... he's been elsewhere. He was Utrecht. He was very, very good, excellent at Utrecht. Worked for Bayern's second team, as well. So he's had a different education. And also we saw Champions League semi-finals. Obviously Tottenham only pipping them at the last seconds in the semi-finals a couple of years back. And he's had, he's been very good in the league. I don't want to do down Dutch football because I enjoy watching it. There's a hell of a lot of talent in Dutch football, but obviously, in terms of a competitive league, it's not up there with the Premier League. So, but I would say what he did in Europe with that Ajax team is probably the best pointer to how he can be, and obviously developing a lot of very talented young players who we now see in the Premier League. We see a fair few of them. So, I like the idea of Ten Hag. Whether it'll be him, I'm not saying, but I certainly know that he's one that Spurs like. Elsewhere, you've got... Who else do they like? There's so many names that they've kind of... It's difficult. People will say this. I'll say all these names and then I'll be told, oh, you're just picking names out of a hat. I'm not, because I will say names that I know are not in the frame. And like I say, it's a long list. It's a list that will get shorter and shorter and shorter. And by the sounds of it, before the end of the season, we will see one person named. I think they'll get to a certain stage where they will then request to talk to managers, and that's when it probably hits the top levels. And I think with Ten Hag, I forgot to mention, I think he's only got 12 months left in his contract. So for a club that's as financially stuffed as Spurs are right now, that will be appetising as well. Attractive is probably the best word rather than appetising. I know they like Graham Potter as well. Graham Potter's one they have a real... they like his style. They like the way his teams play football. I want to put this kind of in the most diplomatic way. Personally, I think you want to have somewhere in the middle of, you want to bring in a winner who plays good football. I think that was the thing with Mourinho, is they brought in someone who'd been there and done it and won silverware, and you want to bring that into a squad that hadn't. I got that. Totally got that. With Ten Hag, I understand that he's won silverware. He's going to come having just literally been a winner in the Netherlands, and I think he brings that into the club, that belief and that winning mentality. With Potter, I think his football's fantastic, and I think he's a very talented coach, and I think he will go on to bigger teams, bigger things. And I think he just probably has been missing a striker in that, a real goal getter in that Brighton team. But I just feel, for me, does he coming in, does he inspire the players? Do the players think, hello, this is a guy that's been there and won it? I just don't know whether he does or not. On a similar topic, I know Roberto Martinez is certainly on this long list. I don't know how high up he is. I think there's links here. Maybe his agent's Pini Zahavi, who I think is obviously has been involved with the club before. Personally, for me, I would look at his club career and I would see how he struggled at Everton, particularly defensively, and I'd question whether you'd put that manager into a club that has struggled defensively. Is he going to fix that? There's no doubt he plays some lovely football, but I think you're going too far in the other direction. And also, I was about to say that with the timing announcement, does that work? But that's not the case, because sometimes international managers, obviously he's the Belgian manager going into Euros, often you'll get announcements about their next club before they start a tournament. I mean, Spurs did it with Jacques Santini, and he was an absolute disaster at the Euros with France. But yeah, Martinez doesn't excite me. Scott Parker's another one they're keeping a very close eye on. He's a former Tottenham boy, as in player and under-18s coach. He's doing very well. I feel personally, is it a bit too early in his career? And potentially, it's looking likely that he's going to have a relegation as his final not his final act, but if he were to come to Tottenham, say it would be the final thing on his CV, would be a relegation. I think he's going to be a very talented young manager. I think he's going to be terrific. And I wouldn't rule out him being a Tottenham manager in the future. I just wonder whether right now is the time they go for him. But who knows? I'd find that a surprise announcement before the end of the season with him having been relegated. I'd be surprised with that one. Elsewhere, other ones I know that they quite like, Massimiliano Allegri, Juventus. Obviously, the massive attraction there is that he's free and he's got a terrific CV full of honours and winning things. On the flip side, on the downside, doesn't really play that sexy football that they're probably looking for, that progressive, attack-minded football. We're not talking ultra defensive, but you're not really fully attacking stuff that they're looking for. And I don't think his English is that great. Then on another one in the cheap but very experienced and all that is Ralf Rangnick, who I understand is someone that I wouldn't say he's high up the short list or the long list, but he may be someone that they have a more serious look at when they start to condense the list, because he's, very experienced. What I would say with him, where he doesn't quite fit for me, is in recent years he's been more of a director of football type with the RB Leipzig and Salzburg kind of setup they've got there. And I do wonder how he'd come into the team. Was in a Premier League team, it's so full on. You can't be a manager and a director of football in one. Doesn't work. You barely get anyone that's like a full on old school manager now in the Premier League. Pretty much always, even if they've got a title manager, they're kind of not doing the old manager stuff, and that's very much left to director of football. I don't really see that one happening. He's done terrific things. The only thing I'd say about him is I do wonder why he hasn't stepped up to bigger clubs before. I think Chelsea were quite interested in him in the past, but more of a temporary, like interim basis. But I just wonder why no one's really taken that punt on him to kind of go to a higher level. He's obviously, I think he's at Schalke, and obviously with Leipzig and stuff. And I just wonder why he's in his 60s now, why he's not quite take that next step. Not that Spurs can be ultra fussy, but I think I do question that very slightly and do wonder whether he's a better director of football or not. So yeah, they're the ones I think we'll look at. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what actually happens with Hansi Flick as well. All the talk was that he was definitely going to Germany, but it kind of really hasn't been set up or actually come out yet. Would Hansi Flick be available? Would that be someone that Spurs would be interested in? I don't know, but certainly as another one who would be a free agent, surely he comes into that cheap, let's have a look option. I know that sounds crap and it's not the kind of thing you want to hear, but current financial climate, I kind of think it makes sense also to look at your options that aren't going to cost you a big compensation fee as well, which is, for me, why Ten Hag ticks a lot of boxes. It really does. And don't get me wrong, there's a risk, there's a gamble. We saw it with Frank de Boer. Ajax bosses coming into the Premier League, it doesn't always work. It's a very different thing. So it is a gamble, but what I just would say is maybe that Champions League football and that, he hasn't been terrific. I don't think they were terrific in Europe this season, but it just shows that extra nous, I think, to kind of to operate in a different kind of environment. Ones that I have been told certainly currently at this stage, are not in the frame. I've seen Sarri, I believe he's one. Nuno Espirito Santo, if I can say it properly, at Wolves. Marcelino, the Athletic Bilbao manager. Gareth Southgate, Eddie Howe. I saw another couple today. Who are they? Lille. Gaultier at Lille, and Glasner at Wolfsburg. As far as I'm aware, all of those aren't currently in consideration. Of course, situations change, things happen. They may suddenly come into, but as of this stage, as far as I'm aware, they're not in the list of people that are potentials. So make of that what you will. But yeah, and one name that I must admit I haven't heard anything about, but I do wonder whether you look at, is Steven Gerrard. Again, I think he maybe falls into the Scott Parker category of it being very early in his career, but he's done a very good job at Rangers, and he obviously has that winning mentality. Again, he's not someone I've heard of in either direction, whether it's coming or not coming. But it just kind of crossed my mind today. I've seen that. To be fair, I've seen other people mention him as a potential candidate. I do feel it's too early, but he certainly is going to be someone I think we'll see in the future. I do wonder though whether he'll be the Klopp successor at Liverpool eventually when Jurgen Klopp decides to move on. But it'd be certainly interesting to see what happens with him in big jobs in the months or years to come. So yeah, there you go. And I don't want to go on too long today, but essentially that's where we're at. Hopefully we'll have an announcement within. It's only just over 3 weeks now before the end of the season, so hopefully we'll have something before then. In the answer to everyone saying who would you like, I think I am leaning towards Erik ten Hag, but like I said, I don't think anyone's quite at that stage yet where it's advanced. You'll quickly know because the clubs will formally have to ask permission to speak to any managers and all that. And then we'll get that will suddenly happen very quickly once that happens. They'll probably formally speak to maybe 2, maybe 3, and then they'll make their final decision, like any kind of job interview thing. But yeah, let's see what they get. I think Ryan Mason's going to do a good job to the end of the season. I think there was some suggestion that what if he'd won the cup final, won every game? By all means, it would have been very difficult not to at least give him it on a slightly longer basis, but I think we're at the stage now where he's a good pair of hands. I think he will learn a lot from the next month or 3 weeks. Like I say, I don't think he embarrassed himself on Sunday in the cup final at all. I think as a new manager up against one of the best in the world, I thought he did pretty well. He made some little errors, but hey, who am I? It's only hindsight. We can all say that with hindsight. But I think you'll see Spurs fixtures are in their favour as well. I think Spurs will put in some really good performance. I think they'll get it out of the system. I think you'll see a really strong end to the season. Hopefully, European qualification. On a really selfish note, I'd love to be back on European adventures when we can get out of this mess we're all in and out of the pandemic and start getting abroad again, have some European away nights and everything, away days. But yeah, no, I think Ryan Mason will do a good job to the end of the season. And I think, who knows, future Tottenham Hotspur manager. I'd like to see the new manager, whoever comes in, give Ryan Mason a role within their coaching staff. I think that would be fantastic. And then, maybe even like Scott Parker strikes out on his own as well. So yeah, let's see what happens. Let's see who comes in. As soon as I know anything, I will obviously give you more information. But I think we're getting somewhere. I think, like I say, that long list is starting to become a shorter list. And then we'll get that announcement hopefully before the end of the season. So yeah, obviously, press conference Friday we've got ahead of Sheffield United at home on Sunday, where Spurs really need to shake off any disappointment from the cup final and crack on and get back to winning ways, because who knows what could happen at the end of the season. It's Tottenham Hotspur. Anything can happen. And it's still kind of all to play for. It's not top 4. It's probably maybe unlikely, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. But certainly it's so tight up there, and other teams, Spurs have probably got one of the more favourable run-ins out of them. Some others have got some not too bad run-ins, but Spurs have got a decent one. It's about getting a little bit of momentum going and then hopefully doing something, and that sets them up nicely for whoever comes in the coming weeks. So there you go. I'm going to head off now. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye.